The Bewcastle Fairies. It was Christmas 1653, not that there was a real Christmas that year, since Oliver Cromwell and his Puritans had banned Christmas as a pagan festival. Instead, we were to have a silent contemplation of the birth of Christ. Silent contemplation, my arse. I needed ale. So I set off Christmas morning, leaving my good wife Jane with the plucked goose and my sons and daughters to do the work needed before I returned to eat. Myself, I got my old bay mare, Jenny. The fact that the horse is called a similar name to my wife is a cause of some confusion to me at times, especially after a few pints sunk. I clip-clopped on Jenny along the roads to Bewcastle. The road is rough. You couldn't get a cart over the ruts and stones in the winter mud. But Jenny managed it just fine. I arrived at the King's Head, a rough, tumble-down sort of place, but very close to my heart, to be greeted by Ned, the landlord. "What are you doing here today, Alexander Armstrong? Shouldn't you be having a silent contemplation of our Lord's birth?" He cackled. "I'd rather do it over a pint of your best ale. I can contemplate while I'm looking into the bubbles," I said. And so I drank one. I drank another one from my leather tankard, which I take with me everywhere on the off chance I may call into an alehouse. Then I sank yet another. There was no one in the pub that Christmas Day but me. At least Ned had the fire on. "Banned Christmas, eh?" Ned said as way of conversation. "Cromwell," I spat. "You a royalist then, Alex?" I shook my head. "I'm an Armstrong. We Armstrongs look after each other. Not English, not Scotch, not royalists, not parliamentarians, just Armstrongs. We live here in the debatable lands and we see to ourselves. So no, Neddy, I'm no royalist. And I don't care whether Christmas is banned. I never cared for it much anyway." I looked around. "Seems it scared the rest of your customers away." Ned said, "No, never had many in Christmas morning. Usually they choose to be with their families." He was making some point. I said, "Maybe they have wives better favoured in the looks department than my Jane." He looked like he might say something more, but I was a good customer, so he spat into the fire instead. After 5 pints, I was feeling a little unsteady. "You having a goose?" he said. "Aye." "You'd better be off, hadn't you?" "S'pose." "Well, Merry Christmas," he said, standing. I stood too, with a little wobble. The beer had gone to my head. "Merry Christmas, Neddy." I gave him a big hug, which took him aback rather. He showed me to the door. He held it open so I could go out. The cold wind blew in, fluttering the fire, rattling the pots and squeaking through all the holes in the wainscoting. It was snowing. "Very seasonal," said Ned. "Aye." "You've a bit of a ride home?" "Aye, but Jane's a good horse." "You mean Jenny," he said. "Jenny's your horse, Jane's your wife." I laughed. "Thanks for reminding me, Ned." The poor old mare stood shivering, hitched outside. In Bewcastle, nothing moved as I rode through the snow. It got in my face, cold and wet, and down my neck. I leaned over the saddle and trusted Jenny to take me home. But the snow grew to be a blizzard and we could hardly see. Jenny was struggling because the snow had grown so deep, and I was getting cold now and shivering with the wet. I wished myself home and thought of the goose waiting for me. I regretted my comments about Jane's looks. She was a dutiful wife and cooked a fine goose, if rather plain of face and fat of arse. We came into a stand of trees. Snow clung to them and whipped across my face. I'd ridden this road 1,000 times, nay, 10,000 in my years, but this place looked strange to me. The snow was in heaps and still blowing, whipping across. Jenny's mane had snow on it. My fingers were blue with cold and numb. My hat had a crust of snow, as did my shoulders, and even into the turnips of my sleeves. The wood went on a while, perhaps because our progress through the snow was difficult and slow. I began to think I would freeze to death before I got home. And then, behind the flitting curtain of snow, I saw a light. A golden light. It came from beyond the trees. I had never seen a light like it before. It was like the sun rising on a beautiful summer morning, but in the middle of the snow and trees. We struggled through the weather and the path took us towards the light. As we got closer, the snow faltered and then vanished, as if it were banished by the golden light, as if we'd crossed a curtain. And now, I could see the source of the light. It came from a hill I recognized as the one they call Skelly Howe. They say it's an ancient place, and the old folks shun it, saying it's the home of fairies. But they're idiots. I thought nothing of such stupidity, but the change in the weather was odd. I looked for the source of the golden glow in case the sun had suddenly chased away the snow, but it was as if we were within an enchanted circle, and I could not see whence the golden light came. Jenny neighed and shook her head to clear the ice from her mane. I took off my hat and shook it, and then I saw a man. I didn't see how he appeared. It was as if he just had appeared. He was the strangest looking fellow, tall and thin with white hair as fine and crisp as if it were made of spun sugar. His complexion was bone white too, with a sharp nose and black lips. His eyes were the deepest violet with no pupils, just enormous violet irises, which blocked out the whites completely. He wore a long gold brocaded coat of blue satin, hardly suited to the weather I'd just been travelling through, though more fitted to this warm place I found myself in now. From his look, I wondered if he was French. He spoke English like a gentleman from down south, not one of us country folk. "Alexander Armstrong, is it?" he said, quite pleasant. I nodded. "Who asks?" "My name is Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow." I cleared my throat. "I'm not familiar with that name, Mr. Goodfellow. Where do you hail from?" "Here and there." I peered at the strange-looking man. "Where is that exactly?" He laughed. "Under dale and over hill." I grew suspicious. "I'm not familiar with that place. It seems to me that you're being rather evasive, Mr. Goodfellow." "Oh, no, not at all, Mr. Armstrong." He seemed to be keen to change the subject. "To cut to the chase, Mr. Armstrong, I find myself in need of someone to do a particular job for me." "A job?" Here it was. Typical Frenchman. "Yes, here it is." He reached into his coat and pulled out a golden sphere. A soft glow emanated from it, and I thought it was humming to itself, though I could be mistaken. "What's that?" said I. "It's an egg." "An egg?" And when I looked at it, it did now seem that it was egg-like. Not shaped like an egg, no, it was perfectly round, but something egg-like adhered to it. "What kind of egg?" "A magic egg." I threw back my head and laughed. He was surely jesting with me, for there is no such thing as a magic egg. "And what will it give hatch to?" said I. "Your fortune." I laughed. "My fortune? Riches beyond your dreams. Are you interested?" I looked at the egg. It might even be made of gold, and if he was foolish enough to trust me with something obviously valuable, then that was his loss. I tilted my head. "So what's the catch?" He looked innocent. "No catch. Why would there be a catch?" "Because strangers don't normally give me golden eggs for nothing in return." He said, "I didn't say for nothing, but it's for almost nothing." "What is the cost?" said I. "Just a tiny thing," said he. "A tiny thing? What tiny thing?" "Just a drop." "Drop of what?" I felt he had something to hide. He smiled a crooked smile. "Just a tiny drop of your blood. It'll be easy enough to get, just a scratch." "That's a most extraordinary request." "It's a most extraordinary egg. And it'll give me riches. It'll give me a few shillings at least if I sold it, that's for sure. Whatever you want. And all this for a drop of blood." "Yes, indeed, just a tiny drop too." I thought this man to be a fool. I stared at the golden egg in his outstretched palm. "Can I feel it?" I asked. "Certainly." He handed me the egg. It was heavy and smooth and cool in my hand. It certainly felt heavy enough to be gold, though I'd never handled such an amount of gold before. "It's really gold?" I asked. He nodded briskly. "And you'll give me this in exchange for a drop of blood?" "Yes." "But why do you want blood?" "To make sure you return the egg. I want it back a year and a day from today." "So, St. Stephen's Day next year?" "I don't like to call it that, but yes." I shrugged, kept the egg in my right hand, and extended my left arm. The sleeve of my coat rolled up, exposing my hairy forearm. "Take your drop." His grin broadened. He took out a little crystal file, fiddled with the stopper, and when he'd removed the stopper, he went towards my forearm with the fingers of his left hand. For the first time, I noticed his fingernails. They were long and sharp, each one extending from his finger ends like the claws of a chicken, and it struck me that there was something exceedingly bird-like about him. He darted forward and pierced my arm with the pointed nail of his index finger. I drew my arm back with a yelp, but he said, "Arm?" A stream of blood ran from where he pricked me. It was nothing really, so I extended my arm towards him again. He took his little crystal bottle and placed it under my arm to catch the drips. "That's more than a drop," said I. "What's a drop or two between friends?" said he, grinning and showing me his sharp little teeth. And then his crystal bottle was full. He pushed the stopper back in it. "So that's it?" I asked. "Absolutely," said he. "Give me the egg." Of course, he was still smiling. It was obvious I had the better part of the deal because all he had was blood and I had a golden egg. Even if it was brass, I'd still get a shilling or so for it in Carlisle. I had no intention of returning to this spot next St. Stephen's Day. None whatsoever, despite what Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow might think. "I can leave now?" I asked. "You can, but be back next St. Stephen's Day with my egg." I took the egg, slipped it in my pocket. The weight was reassuringly heavy. It might even be gold. It might even be. I smiled. As I turned Jenny to leave Mr. Goodfellow, he said, "Think of this as an act of philanthropy, Mr. Armstrong, but remember, this is merely a loan. Once it has given you a year of riches." "Yes, yes, I," said I, as I trotted off Jenny. Soon, like a curtain falling, I was back in the snow, and the golden glow was a memory. In fact, it felt like a dream, so much so that I tapped the pocket of my overcoat but found the egg heavy and reassuringly present. I got home, got my goose, drank my ale, and fell asleep by the fire while Jane and the girls cleared up. The lads had gone courting to their fancy pieces. Christmas came and went, and New Year. I had a fine New Year, made even better when my Uncle Joseph from Lanercost died and left me £5. When I heard that, I took the egg from the hidey-hole I'd found for it in a hole in the byre wall, and I swiveled it round in my fingers, talking to it like it was a child. "So did you do this, O egg?" said I. But the egg, it didn't reply, just glistened in the light of my lantern. "Did you bring me £5? If so, I thank you." And in January, 5 cattle strayed onto my land, so I kept them. Andrew Hetherington from over Gillilees turned up at my gate saying they were his, but I saw him off at the tip of a sword. They maybe were, but he couldn't prove it. Silly fool hadn't marked them. In February, my daughter Mary got a wedding arrangement and me a generous dowry from Tom Greenhow from Triermain's father for him to take her off my hands. I had thought of taking the egg to Carlisle to sell it. It seemed hard to believe that my good fortune was tied to this thing. But I smiled when I held the egg, turning it over and over in my fingers. Maybe it really was magic. In March, the weather still didn't improve, but my Jane took ill and died, which was a blow, for I had no one to cook and clean for me. The children were mortally upset at the death of their mother, but they were always soft. So I had to hire a maidservant to do the work that Jane had done for nothing, especially with Mary going soon. The cost of it grieved me, though I did drive down the price from the ridiculous sum the girl first asked. She was a comely one, the new maid, Sarah Morton. Very comely, dark-haired and young. With a few drinks taken one night, I grabbed a firm arse, and that was that. She agreed for me to be her husband. I am an attractive man, if I say so myself. My animal deals were going well, and I prospered. Now, I had a lithe young thing in my bed at night, and because she was to marry me, I didn't have to pay her now for the housework. So Jane's death worked out well. After I took Sarah Morton to my bed, the children refused to speak to me and left. Another cost removed. In April, the weather improved, and I decided to take my trip to Carlisle. I got Jenny out and took the egg to get it valued. It took me all day to get there, but I stayed in the Crown and Mitre. Then I walked round to see John Walker, who was a jeweller and silversmith, who had a shop on English Street. Walker was a Scotchman, originally from Kirkcubright, though I didn't hold that against him. He knew his stuff, and as he sat there with his eyeglass and the egg up close, "Where did you get this?" "Here and there," he snorted. I asked, Is it gold? He nodded and said in his Scotch brogue, Aye, it is, pure too. Honestly, Mr. Armstrong, this is a most uncommon thing. It's worth a fortune. He was foolish to tell me that. How much would you give me for it? Well, he began to mutter. I knew his brain would be calculating his profit. Really, he mumbled on. I grew tired with him. How much, Mr. Walker? He stuttered. I'll give you £200 for it. Scotch or English? Scots. Make it English. Very well. It's worth more than that, said I, and he remained tight-lipped. It might be worth more than that, but I'd have to travel to York or London to get more. £200 was a fortune indeed, so I agreed. £200 English then. When can I have the money? Tuesday. It was Saturday. Too long, I said. Make it Sunday. I don't trade on the Lord's Day, I snorted. You trade any day. No, sir, I do not. Idiot that he was. Monday then, I said. He looked pained. Monday it is. Grand. I shook his hand. I don't think he was too pleased with me from the limpness of the grip. He said, Can I keep the egg to raise money against? I laughed, taking the egg back from his feeble paw. I think not, Walker, I think not. How do I know you're an honest man? He looked taken aback. I assure you, sir, I am. A good Christian, too. Aye, well, you'll have the egg when I have my money. I'll see you Monday midday sharp. And that was that. I extended my stay at the Crown and Mitre and enjoyed myself at chops and ale. Monday came, Walker gave me the money, and I him the egg. My journey home was uneventful, but when I got back, Sarah Morton was gone, and before we'd officially married too. Never mind, thought I. I'd had the use of her. I hired a new maid at less wage. She was not as handsome as Sarah, but she did. I had the use of her too, but I didn't marry her. I had no more strokes of luck or windfalls, but it didn't matter, as I had my £200, and that did me well. The year went by and winter came. I lived by myself with yet another maid. It seemed they didn't tolerate me too well, or my roving hands, but there were always more, and I liked the variety. Christmas found me at the King's Head in Bewcastle, sinking Christmas pints with Ned. The weather was bad, rain rather than snow, but sleety, cold rain. I took rather too much ale in my leather tankard and stayed over long. Ned's wife put me up in the rude hovel they call an inn-room, and it was St. Stephen's Day by the time I'd had a hair of the dog that bit me and was ready to saddle my Jenny and make my way home. The rain swept across the moor as I rode. I got to the trees again and saw a familiar golden glow. Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow. I'd forgotten about him and his egg since I'd sold it at Carlisle, but I didn't intend to make his acquaintance again. No, sir, I did not. I rode through the wood, head down. The glow persisted. It was to my right. I knew a rough track. It would be bad in the weather, but my Jenny could manage it, so I took the reins and steered her up towards the fell. The light shifted until it was right in front of me. That was odd. I steered right back towards the main road, and the light shifted in front of me again. The weirdness of this unnerved me. I decided I did not want to meet Mr. Spindlethrift Goodfellow at all that day, so I turned right round and headed back to Bewcastle. I'd spend another night at the King's Head and come back when it was no longer St. Stephen's Day. But the light grew in front of me some yards ahead, and then, suddenly, a dome of light appeared above and on all sides. The rain vanished, and I sat on horseback, and what to all appearances was a mild spring day. Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow stood there in a blue coat brocaded in gold. His long white hair hung down his back. His bone-white skin shone with a strange pallor. His violet eyes fixed me, and he licked his lips, showing his tongue and rows of sharp white teeth. I was no longer sure he was French. "Good day, Mr. Armstrong," said he. "I hope you weren't trying to avoid me." I coughed. "No, of course not." "You didn't forget our appointment." I shook my head. "Good," said he. "I trust my egg brought you fortune." I nodded. "Then," said he further, "the year is done. 1 year and 1 day, just like in the old bargains. And now, I'd like my egg back." "I don't have it," said I, bold as brass. That's the way to face down these mountebanks and charlatans. He cocked his head. "You don't have it?" "No, and what'll you do about that?" I thought him being so thin and spindly What could he do against a man like me in the prime of health, gone a little to corpulence, I admit, but still strong in the arm like my name? I thought once I put my fists up, it would bluster and fuss like a woman, then go. What will I do? He smiled. He seemed amused. He reached into his coat and pulled out the little crystal bottle. I saw it held a filament of red. He took off the top, turned the bottle upside down and dabbed it on his index finger. Then he licked it. He grinned. Very tasty. I think I'll have some more. Still with the bottle in his hand, he said, and don't worry about the egg. Mr. Walker sold it to me for £300. It's more your lack of honesty that is of interest to me. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. Of interest to you? He laughed again. His tiny sharp teeth were wet with spit and stained with my blood. Of interest, said he, because I can't touch an honest man. Luckily, you're not. I don't know what you're talking about. I decided not to turn to fisticuffs. I'd just go home. I turned Jenny and began to trot off, but every way I went, the dome of golden light followed me, imprisoning me. And he was always there. He neither went further away, nor did he come closer. I went this way and that, and he followed me, laughing as if my panic was a jest. I had to get away and clicked and spurred Jenny, kicking her with my heels, but I couldn't get away from that infernal Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow. After half an hour, my heart was in my throat. My blood pulsed in my ears. Both Jenny and I were lathered with sweat. He grinned. Try as you might, Mr. Armstrong, you can't escape your fate. My fate, I'll have naught to do with you. But I stopped. There must be some other way. He stood in front of me now. And then I was on the soft, tusky turf lying on my back. Jenny stood over me, then started grazing. It was as if she was glad to have me off her back and didn't care I was laid low, the callous, faithless animal. And Spindledrift Goodfellow had my head cradled on his lap, stroking my jugular vein with his sharp fingernail. I felt my artery bound under his firm touch. He tapped the blood vessel as if testing its pressure. Who are you? I said hoarsely. Mr. Spindledrift Goodfellow. But who is that? They call me many names. The Lightbringer, the Prince of the Air. You confuse me, sir, indeed you do. He whispered more names. The Adversary, the Lord of the Flies, and the Serpent. It's long since I've read the Bible or gone to church, but I was beginning to realize into whose arms I'd fallen. And Spindledrift Goodfellow continued in a sing-song voice, light as thistledown. Or Old Nick, he laughed. They sometimes call me that. He gazed down with violet eyes, his needle-like nail on the pulse of my neck. But you can call me the devil.